So that's the initial kind of event causal libertarian response. Event causal libertarianism has received more and more attention in recent philosophical literature, but it's also been plagued by certain problems. And one of the main problems it's faced is sometimes called the problem of present luck. So the worry here is that, look, if you're an event causal libertarian, then what you think of as freely willed actions are inherently lucky actions. Given they're inherently lucky, the fact that you did one thing rather than the other seems to be a matter of luck. This is going to reduce or remove the control that you have over your action. And if it reduces or removes the control, it would seem to make you unfree, or at least less free, given that, free will is tightly connected with having control. And if you have less or no control, then you have less freedom or no freedom. So why think that freely willed actions are inherently lucky actions? Well, to do this, let's consider two possible worlds. So philosophers sometimes talk about possible worlds as a way of talking about possibilities. Very few of them actually think that these worlds exist, but some do. In any event, nothing of what I'm going to say is going to commit us to fanciful metaphysical claims. So we have these two possible worlds. And so imagine at a particular time, up until a particular time, they have the same past and laws of nature. So that means that, everything that's happened in that world has been exactly the same. They're governed by the same laws of nature. But the laws of nature happen to be not fully causally deterministic. There's a bit of indeterminism in there. They allow that certain causes aren't going to lead to certain effects. Certain events won't always lead to necessitate other events. Suppose that in the first world, Simon commits his act of theft. At that time, up until that time, the laws of nature were leading towards him committing the theft. And then at time one, he had a decision about whether to steal or not. And in the first world, he decides to steal. But now suppose that in the second world, he decides to give a charitable donation. And the worry here is, like, if you're a libertarian, this is how you imagine free will working. You're imagining that in the first world, you can choose to commit an act of theft, and that can be freely willed. Whereas in the second world, you can give a charitable donation, commit a good act, and you can do that given the exact same past and exact same laws of nature in those worlds. The worry here is then, well, what explains why you do one thing rather than the other? It seems to just be lucky. It seems to be like almost a coin flip that you decide to commit the act of theft rather than a charitable donation. So if you were looking back and you were trying to explain why you committed the theft or gave to charity, there would be no difference. You say, well, looking at the first world, Simon commits the theft because of his character preferences or his situation. Yeah, but you say the same thing here. There's no real difference. There's no difference to explain why he does one thing rather than the other. And so it seems like the freely willed action, according to the event causal libertarian, is inherently a lucky one. It could have easily been otherwise, given exactly the same situation. So again, we have no explanation in these ones. If things are exactly the same, how do we know that you really exercise control? It seems like you're at the whim of the universe, let's say, because was it really something about you that explained why, or really something about Simon in the example that explains why he stole rather than gave to charity? It doesn't seem to be anything distinctive about him, given that in the exact same situation, he might have easily done another thing. And so you might think, well, maybe it's too strong to say that the luckiness here undermines a person's control, but at least seems to reduce it. At least seems that the person has less control, given that they'll get to a particular fork in the road, and the reason why they go left rather than right is just a matter of luck. It at least seems to reduce your control there. Now, let's consider responses to the problem. There's been quite a few libertarian responses here. Excuse me. I just want to focus on one from Robert Kane. And key to his response is his particular view of what free will involves. So he thinks that we don't always act freely. Not every decision. Well, he thinks every decision that we make need not have alternative possibilities. He just thinks that at certain points of our life, we have these self-forming actions. When we make, for example, when we make these major life choices, or we're torn between moral values and self-interest. When we have these kind of torn decisions, this can lead to self-forming actions. But key to these torn decisions and self-forming actions is this idea of plural voluntary control. He thinks that in these cases of torn decisions, we're actively trying to do both things. We may not think it, we may not consciously be aware of it, but he thinks at some level, we're trying to do both things at once. We've got efforts going in both ways. And so the idea here, right, consider you deciding whether you're going to go to Glasgow University or Edinburgh University. When you were mulling this over and making this decision, like you might have thought, well, all the reasons are towards going to Glasgow Uni, and you may have considered some going towards Edinburgh Uni. But for Kane, if this was a self-forming action, if this was really like free sort of self-forming action, you would have been at some level sort of really trying to go to Glasgow Uni and trying to go to Edinburgh Uni. These two parts of yourself would have been going in different directions, kind of competing with one another. You might not have been consciously aware of it, but it was happening at some level. And because you were having this kind of real torn decision, Kane speculates, and it really is very big speculation here. This is an important point against event causal libertarianism. He speculates that this kind of torn decision, this process of deciding and being torn between two major things, might trigger an indeterministic process at some micro level of your neurons. So your brain is made up of all these neurons, but at some deeper level, there might be this kind of quantum indeterminacy, and your decision, your torn decision, has triggered this quantum indeterminacy, and that indeterminacy has allowed that, you know, it wasn't determined whether your efforts towards going to Glasgow or your efforts towards going to Edinburgh would sort of pan out. There were both open possibilities at that point. And then the outcome of this torn decision is going to lead to kind of self-formation. So once you decide to go to Glasgow Uni, that's going to make you like, I'm going to Glasgow Uni now, I'm going to have all those experiences. And if you're torn between moral values and self-interest, then how you choose in that instance of a torn decision is then supposed to influence how you will choose later on. So you decide to help the person being mugged and you choose your moral values, you become a more moral person in the future. You decide to choose your self-interested values, then you become more self-interested in future. These torn decisions basically help form who you are. And later on, you might not have alternative possibilities. But for Kane, that's okay, because your actions still have an ultimate source in these self-forming actions when you did have alternative possibilities. And so for Kane, what's key for his view is ultimate responsibility is about shaping our characters, about shaping who we are. And yeah, again, we don't need alternative possibilities for every decision. Once you become a very moral person or a very self-interested person, maybe there's many times where you can't do otherwise. Maybe you're always just going to be self-interested from now on. But that's because at an earlier point, you had the opportunity to be otherwise. But you decided using your free will to be who you are now, and you've crafted who you are now. And now you are ultimately responsible for your self-interested decisions, even if you couldn't do otherwise at those later times. So Kane notably has a lot in common with how Galen Strawson is viewing free will. There's a lot about ultimate responsibility, which you might think of as another way of talking about true responsibility. There's a lot about self-formation, being responsible for who you are. But for Kane, there's never any kind of causa sua. You're never a self-creator in the sense that Galen Strawson thinks you need to be. So if you're a self-creator, one way to think about it is not only do you get to choose from a set of materials about the kind of person you're going to be, but you get to choose the materials themselves. For Kane, it's more that you form your character or shape your character given the materials you're given. So it might still be a matter of luck what materials are given, what your initial character or preferences or motivations are. But Kane thinks that, you know, we're given this, we have no control over the materials we're given, about the kind of person we're going to be, but we do have control at certain key moments in our life about what we're going to do with that. And we can change who we are. We can move towards being a better or worse person through these instances. But you might still worry, well, isn't it still a matter of luck how we turn out? Have we really gotten past the problem of present luck? It's worth mentioning here that you might still worry about luck in how you come into existence, or constitutive luck. You might still worry about the luck of the kind of character you're given. There's still a lot of luckiness there. I think Kane is happy to accept that. He thinks that's no threat to free will. It would be a threat if you had no choices or decision about how you use those materials, how you had no choice over what your character preferences or motivation were like. But given that he thinks that you do have a choice at certain key moments of your life, he's not concerned about that. So for the sake of argument, let's not worry about constitutive luck. Let's focus on present luck. Is it still not the case that it's lucky how things turn out? A key point for Robert Kane here is he thinks that he's got a clear way of showing that indeterminism doesn't necessarily undermine responsibility. So he accepts that in some cases, indeterminism does. So if there's an indeterministic process that causes a spasm in your arm and you knock someone over, that undermines responsibility for you. That wasn't freely willed. There was an indeterministic thing in your brain and it caused your arm to spasm, then that undermines responsibility. So he's not saying that indeterminism is always compatible with freedom and responsibility. He's aware that and agrees that it sometimes undermines it. But he thinks that there's clear cases where indeterminism doesn't necessarily undermine it. And one example he gives is of three assassins. So what you have to imagine here is you have three assassins who are lined up with their sniper rifles, waiting to kill the prime minister of a different country. So one is going to try and kill the British prime minister, one the French prime minister, one the Spanish prime minister. And I suppose the one that is aiming to kill the British prime minister only has a 50% chance of success. Maybe there's some indeterministic process in between him firing the bullet and the bullet being hit that means that his bullet might not actually hit it. Maybe it's undetermined how the wind is going to blow. So maybe there's a 50% chance that the wind is just right and the bullet goes straight into the prime minister's head. But there's a 50% chance that the wind isn't right and it doesn't go into his head. Now, the one that's trying to kill the French prime minister, the odds are a bit more in his favor, 80% chance. Still a 20% chance that the wind conditions aren't quite right, and that's not determined here, but there's a far higher chance he's going to kill his intended target. Now we turn to the assassin who's aimed at the Spanish prime minister, and it's 100% chance. The wind conditions are perfect. There's no chance of the wind being different and the bullet not hitting. Now, Kane's claim here is that there's no difference in responsibility between any of these assassins. Even if the one who is trying to kill the British prime minister has less of a chance of succeeding, that's still an action that has its origin inside him. The person is still the ultimate source. So the mere fact there's indeterminism in the sort of process or in the world or between the agent and the outcome they're aiming to cause doesn't necessarily undermine responsibility. Likewise, the person trying to kill the French prime minister has more of a chance of doing it. It's still not fully determined that it will happen, but they're still responsible. And in the 100% chance, in the 100% chance case where the assassin is trying to kill the Spanish prime minister, Kane thinks that, as long as the person is the ultimate source of their action, then the fact that there was no chance that it could have gone wrong at this time due to the wind conditions being just right means that that person is also fully responsible. And Kane sees no difference in the responsibility of these three assassins. They're just as responsible as one another. Kane does admit, though, that the first two assassins do have some diminished control, right? He thinks that, they have less control of the outcome that they're trying to cause due to conditions in the world. But he thinks that that doesn't affect how responsible they are. So from that, he thinks that indeterminism doesn't necessarily undermine responsibility. So what do you think of this response? One worry that occurs to me is that, okay, Kane has shown that there's no conceptual incompatibility between indeterminism and lack of responsibility. So it is possible, it seems to me, I agree with Kane, that your efforts at doing something might not fully determine the outcome. And so your efforts might be indeterministic. They might only raise the chances of the thing you're trying to happen occurring. And I agree that that might be compatible with responsibility. But what Kane has really been focused on all along has been these torn decisions. It's not clear yet to me from this that he's really shown that these torn decisions where things can go different as a matter of luck, it's not yet clear to me that he's shown that that doesn't undermine responsibility. The assassin's case involves things that are sort of outside the agent, things in the world. Whereas in the torn decisions, it's stuff that happens at like the neuronal level, or stuff that happens in the brain. So it's not yet clear to me that Kane has given an adequate response here. Now, there's a lot more we could say about the problem of present luck and event causal libertarianism, but we're going to leave it there for the moment. If you're interested in reading more about event causal libertarianism, there'll be a list of resources in the reading list. And if there's anything else you have questions about, feel free to get in touch with me. For now, we're going to turn and move on to agent causal libertarianism.